Timeless, the human experience through a quantum lens. Hello and welcome to Timeless, a podcast with me, Isabel Soden.
And myself, Clive Howland.
Today...
You started already.
I had a strict but soft note from the producer to stop purring into the microphone quite so much. And I think in response, I open with a purr. But perhaps, dear listener, that will be my last. I am genuinely going to try. I know, no, but I'll try.
No.
Great. We're here talking about spirituality. I'm excited. I'm not going to start again. We're going to keep rolling.
Yeah.
Great. Clive, tell me about spirituality.
Okay. So we know that the last two episodes that we did, there was some tough stuff in there. You know, even speaking about it was tough because they're unfamiliar concepts that we were trying to string together in a relatable way. I think the good news for the listener about this one is that this can be much more playful, because what we've done really is we've put the science blocks in place to sort of say, where is that? And I think in this conversation now, it's about using our imagination a lot more. And, you know, that's the starting point, really, because in my language, science is much more about deductive reasoning, deductive thinking. You know, it's taking a load of information and breaking it down through analysis and then coming to some conclusions, right? Mm-hmm. But when we get into the spirituality space, it's much more about inductive thinking, you know, where you're given a piece of information, you can expand on that, use your imagination to see the world differently, fundamentally. So, and I think that's nice. It's nice to have that. It's a bit lighter as a subject.
How does spirituality sit in the quantum realm? Why is it relevant? How does it come to be here?
Okay. So I think the starting point for me is very much around, if you go back in history, since we've understood human beings, there's always been the thought processes and reflection processes around, you know, how do we fit in the universe? You know, whether it's Neanderthals and Homo sapiens doing paintings on cave walls, you know, Greek philosophers or modern day philosophers. It's like, how do we fit? Why are we here? And all that sort of stuff. The intimation to me is that we're looking for, what do we belong to? It's that something bigger idea that it's like we need to belong to something bigger. Because that gives us meaning outside of our daily experience. Now, the problem we've had up until now, and what's the polarization between areas like spirituality and science, is that, you know, science has only been interested in the provable. And there's nothing we're going to say today that will make any spiritual or religious belief provable. But I think there's enough room to bring it back to the table for all the other stuff we've been discussing in the previous episodes, because we need to acknowledge now that science is a boundary of understanding. It is not a complete answer. Yeah. So from our point of view, then, it's particularly the quantum dimension that brings the debate in. And by that, I mean, I've been very struck, you know, by some of my own studies around the parallels between what would be classic religion territory and quantum logic. Little things like, you know, omnipresence, which can be talked about certainly in a Christian sense, you know, the idea of God being everywhere and in everything. Yeah. And that's exactly the same principle when we talk about quantum energy. It is all we know, and the only thing that exists at a foundational level that we understand. And then you've got the idea of infinite, you know, which is timeless. Same principle is applied in Christianity and in other religions, I think, where it's about this goes on forever. And we don't have brains that can cope easily with an understanding of infinity. So it takes us beyond, and the same thing applies with the quantum logic, you know, that is, time is only a creation of man. The universe is timeless. Yeah. So there are these parallels, and they come up time and time again. And so for the first time, what I and some others have been spotting is that there's like a common ground in terms of language where it's just about possible that science and belief, spiritual and religious belief, are investigating the same areas. One does it from an intuitive belief point of view, and the other one does it from a science point of view. Even though I would argue science is just another belief system, okay, which is another debate. But the essence of it is we can explore the same ground, and we can do it collaboratively rather than excluding each other. Okay, is the starting point?
Yeah. I kind of want to spend a whole episode on science as a belief system.
Yeah. I know. That's the trouble, isn't there? Well, this associative thinking, that bounces around. So that's why I never quite know what I'm going to come up with.
Yeah.
So scientists now could have a basis for having a more respectful view of religion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because we know there is a dimension out there that is everlasting and is everything. And that's a hell of a starting point, right? And, one can challenge those things, and that's what these conversations are about. But it really means that religion and spirituality are very much, if you think a lot of religion was born at an earlier time where there was a huge element of symbolism in the way that we try to understand this place of being a part of something bigger. So we needed symbols in order to marshal our understanding and ground our understanding of what it meant, okay? And a classic symbol of that would be an image of God, or an image of of other divine beings. My language probably is too clumsy, but Jesus, etc. And Muhammad. It's that type of stuff which enables us, on some level we know those some of those people actually existed, but a huge element is we need visual symbols, internal symbols that allow us to focus our attention and have something we can interact with.
Yeah.
Part of the challenge in the quantum debate is how can you interact with a quantum energy you don't understand?
And can't perceive.
Yeah. So you need a model, a visual model, ideally, which pulls that together and sort of says, this is what you can now engage with. Yeah. And to me, religion and many spiritual beliefs are very much around, linking with visions that allow us to channel our belief system.
So the same sense is put into different metaphors according to different cultures and societies.
Absolutely.
In order to understand.
Yes.
And then that framework, I would then add, I think there's an interesting distinction between spirituality and religion.
Yes.
And then, the religion becomes systems with which, I don't know, power hierarchies come in. And then, they have a second role to play, which is law enforcement and, upholding civilized society. But it kind of morphs into that.
Yeah.
But going back to the source of spirituality and metaphor.
Yeah, to me, it's like whether you sit in a scientific camp or a religious camp, there's now a basis of saying we should be interested in this.
Yeah.
And certainly in the science area previously, there was no basis for that. We thought it was just all about the material world, and we thought we were close to cracking all the key secrets of that material world. And now we understand a lot more. We're only scratching the surface.
Yeah.
Okay, so it leaves the door open then to the imaginative debate around, so what is the bigger stuff that we are all looking to be a part of? Yeah, and I know, I've talked to scientists in the past, and they've sort of said things like, well, the only thing I believe is in maths, but it's still a belief system. Yeah, it doesn't have the same ring, if you like, as a religious or spiritual belief, but it's still a belief system because there's nothing to prove that the only thing that exists is maths. We use maths to try and bring it into the human experience so we can harness it, but it's just another belief system.
Hang on a minute. Maths equations are provable by their own inherent logic?
Well, I mean, the real idea of maths isn't in terms of the link with physics. It's all about we have a theory, but we then need to break it down to a mathematical level, which proves that it can be repeated. It's something that's reliable as an execution force, if you like. It gets things done. So, but I'm saying even then, maths itself is a belief in a set of rules. It's just that those rules are different to the rules that we apply in the religious space, or in the spiritual space. They're more intuitive rules. They're probably more flexible rules, right? Because they're not overly concerned with empirical evidence, because they believe what they're dealing with is beyond empirical evidence. Yeah? But it's still a belief system. That's my point. You can't say this is about a belief. This isn't. There's curious, highlights of that. Science is supposed to be all about rigor and evidence, but most polls show that over 40% of scientists believe in God. Well, how does that fit?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So it's like there's like this is the science is what I do, but that's not necessarily who I am. And sometimes we lose sight of that. And this is more about the who I am debate and, where did I come from? And that's a good debate to have.
Yeah. Do you know if that percentage of religiosity is higher or lower than in the general public in the scientific community?
No, I don't specifically. I'd have a guess, but it would only be a guess.
Go on, have a guess.
I think it's probably more. That believe in, but the interpretation of God, right? Because I would say I believe in God, right? But it's not. It's this belief in a bigger thing, a bigger power, that for me has been represented in my education through religious symbols, right? But I think I've grown beyond that, and now I sort of look for a greater understanding. So I don't feel tied in any way to a Christian perspective, or a Buddhist perspective, because I've got huge time for some of the Buddhist stuff. But they all help me to get to a higher thinking place, which is, I need to find my experience of that something bigger. And I found it, but it doesn't fit into, traditional images of what God is. So it's very difficult, I think, to turn around and sort of say, do you believe in God or not? Can you give us a one-word answer to that? Because what God means to people is a hugely subjective experience.
Yes.
Yeah. Make sense?
Yeah.
Do I sound like a politician? Just avoiding a straight answer?
No, I don't think so at all.
Okay, good.
No.
Okay, so we can talk about, let's speculate a bit further, all right? We talked about intelligent universe in the last episode. Let's take that a stage further and imagine what it may all be about. So again, this is to spark imagination and conversation rather than to present an answer.
Yeah.
Okay? But I guess in a spiritual space, the ultimate question we all ask is, why are we here? What's the point? What's our role of being here? Now, let's start from an explanation. Go on.
Well, why are we here? Or is that different from meaning?
No, I think it is meaning, right? Because it's like, what's the purpose of us being here? And if we haven't a sense of purpose, it's very difficult to have a sustaining self-value. Yeah. So I think even though we will interpret our purpose in many different ways, it's all about that ultimate question. What's the point of being human? Yeah. And I think most people ask that, albeit they ask it in different ways.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yes, I'm with you. Yeah.
So if the foundation is the idea of intelligent universe, which we discussed last time, that there's constant information exchange, we can build on that then in the sense that, so as life evolved on Earth, it was all about evolving to explore more sophisticated levels of information, which includes experience, right? Because experience is a source of information.
Yes.
Remember, I was saying we have to widen our understanding of what we mean by information.
Yes.
And basically, it's almost like a form of the universe experience in itself. So it understands itself at a more powerful and level which it can continue to evolve.
What do you mean the universe experiencing itself?
So if we don't have something to interact with, how can we know who we are? Now, this is, we are doing a level of human projection here, but that's the only way that we can think. Okay.
Yes.
Right. But let's start with that for the moment. So fundamentally, we need to interact with something to understand who we are. Like if we as human beings had no feedback, and feedback doesn't have to be explicit, right? It can be very implicit in terms of people's gestures and moods and the energy and all that sort of stuff. If we don't put ourselves out there and get something back, we don't know where we are, right? We don't know who we are, because we're constantly looking for validation of feedback, in the sense, okay, yeah, I'm having an impact and I'm getting feedback, so I exist, right? It's a pretty sort of deep level. So we need to work with that. And if we have that need as human beings, it's reasonable to suppose that all started with the universe. That need didn't start when we became human. Nothing started with us. We're a culmination of evolution over a period of time.
I think that's such an interesting distinction that, yes, we have to see everything from a human perspective, but what we can avoid doing is assume that it all begun with our experience.
Exactly. We're not exception. There's this argument about humans being, it's the exceptionalist perspective. We're not. There's nothing to support the view that, there are different rules to us. Yes, we are a culmination. We've built intelligence at more sophisticated levels, but all that experience, evolutionary experience, we've taken with us. Okay, so why? Why do we have a need to have that validation, that information that comes back that helps us understand who we are? This is arguable that comes from the universe itself at a much more primordial level. Okay, so I then couple that with the argument around the wonder of evolution. Okay, and we can so much take this for granted, right? And we get close to it when we watch some of the things on TV and we see some of the incredible things that happen around us, like on David Attenborough programs and things like that. But the more time you spend with it, things like evolutionary biology, the more amazing it is. The fact that what we do as human beings and what other species do in order to survive. And when you look at how that has happened, how does a single cell end up knowing that by division and specialization is going to create a human body with these amazing brains that we've got? Yeah. And it's so easy to pass over that intelligence and say, okay, well, that's just the way it is. But then you work out and say, yeah, but where does it come from? And when you look at evolution, most people buy into the idea of evolution, right? But I don't think there's enough acknowledgement of the enormous level of intelligence it's taken for us to get there, right? So you're still left with the question, where does that intelligence come from? You can't say it comes from evolution. Well, how did it get into an evolutionary state, right? So we're back to this whole piece of the universe through evolution experiencing itself at a new level, okay, and constantly doing that. So you come to the why question. And I think there's an answer at that level to the why question. Drum roll, right? So this is a Clive Island perspective, right? Because I think we're here to provide that feedback into the universe, intelligence gathering that allows it to continue to evolve. So there has to be a loop that gives us the most recent set of experiences for us to then build that into our intelligence system that allows us to continue to evolve. And if we don't have new species and new generations bringing that information back, and we'll come back to how does that work, then how does it evolve? It doesn't have enough intelligence of our experience unless it's presented back. Yeah? You with me so far?
Well, I mean, but what you're saying is we remain part of the process of evolution where the universe is experiencing itself and becoming more sophisticated as a consequence of that experience. And we're just part of that process.
We're part of that process, entirely that. Okay. Yeah. So I think our role, and this is a fairly pragmatic level, if you like, rather than it's still spiritual, but it's not religious. But it's like, I think our role is to learn and to take that information back into the universe so the universe itself becomes more intelligent. Because we've already talked earlier on about an intelligent universe that started off at quite a primordial intelligence level, but becomes more and more intelligent, more and more sophisticated by the experiences it gathers. Now, this assumes everything's connected, okay, which is the quantum piece, and it allows us to take information back into the universe. And my belief, and this is just a belief system, is that we do that at the point of death, ultimately.
Ooh.
Right?
Where did that leap?
So,
give me the whys.
Because basically, clearly there's the genetic piece. So that's the first exchange of information, if you like, in terms of when we can create the next generation, Obviously, at that point, we've already got all sorts of built-in learning built into our genetics, which we carry forward. But I don't think that's the end of it, because my belief system, based on this mixture of spirituality and science, is that when we come to the end of our lives, our brains die, but our minds don't. Okay, so this is the way you stepped back then was lovely, yeah. No, so, and some people would call that a soul. I think it's a slightly different thing, so I want to stick with the mind idea for now, right? Where do I get that from? What's any sort of scientific justification for that? Because the first rule of thermodynamics in physics is you can't destroy energy.
Yeah.
So there's nothing to suggest that the energy that is our life force dies when we die. Yes, the body which carries that life force dies, including the brain, but it's plausible to say that the energy continues and it goes back into, if you like, goes back into the ocean. The wave returns from the beach back into the ocean. And we take that information with us. And therefore, that fits to me with a quantum perspective, which is everything connected, an intelligent universe. There is a constant process of gathering and building on information.
So we're in this miasma of accumulated intelligence as mind.
Yes. And that's where you pick up the ideas of collective mind, collective consciousness, which is, people like Jung thought about that, but didn't really have the technology to sort of prove it. And of course, it's still not provable. Yeah. It's become slightly more plausible as a possibility. And again, I'm not trying to convince anyone to this. What I'm trying to say is, look, this is a reasonable interpretation in terms of my experience and my knowledge. And I encourage all other people to do their own thought processes around this and see where their thought conclusions come to. It's healthy to have the conversation and stretch your own beliefs. But for me, it works. And even if I'm wrong, it has a lovely effect on my life because it makes me feel like I'm in a good place. And I'll stay in that good place until I discover information that shows me that I'm wrong, in which case I'll be happy to change, which is like a bit of a Buddhist principle.
Why does it make you feel like you're in a good place?
Because it gives me value. It says that, the stuff I'm continuing to learn, continuing to share still matters, that it won't end when my life ends, that it'll carry forward, and it makes me feel connected with the species. It gives me purpose.
Yeah.
The second law of thermodynamics is all about entropy, which is the natural way by which form loses its structure. Mm-hmm. And in human terms, you could be talking about life and death. It's the way that our structures that hold us together in the material world as human beings break down. Now, that's a natural force. It's like a default force in the universe, which is why things die. And, of course, they have to create the room for the next generation, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the fundamental counterforces, so to resist that force, you have to have a counterforce, which prevents it from, totally creating entropy, in which case the whole system breaks down and you die, right? And you're going to get to that point. We know that, right? These podcasts won't solve that one, I'm afraid.
You die, but the system outlives your entropy.
Well, the collective system obviously stays in place, but what I'm trying to say is the body will break down, but we got onto the point of purpose, which is partly linked into spirituality. And my argument is that you resist entropy by having purpose. You create a counterforce, energetic force, through believing in what you're doing, which gives you the ability to resist that natural flow of entropy, which will eventually result in the loss of your body. Okay? Does that make sense?
It does.
It's a counterforce.
Big idea.
Yeah, it is, because it's, I'm often asked for questions about resilience and things like that. I think that belief is the essence of resilience, and it gives you that counterforce that enables you to resist all the tough pressures you've got to deal with, that life involved it inevitably throws at you.
So it's the sort of it's the life force. It's called that. It's resilience. So it's physically manifest as well.
Absolutely. 100%, And all I'm trying, anyone can listen to my ideas and say, well, I don't agree with that. But and that's fine, all right, because I have no monopoly on this stuff, right? But it's like, okay, I hope people can understand how I've pieced it together.
Yeah.
And it's a combination of intuition, of, perhaps some religious influences, science influences. They're all in there. And to me, it's like a mosaic that comes together and creates an image that gives me resonance. But it's a great feeling. It's a deep feeling. It's not just an intellectual exercise. It's something that grounds me. And as I said, gives me purpose. And purpose to me is the essence of life. And then we're back to the evolution discussion, right? Why are we here? Because we're discovering our purpose and we're moving forward and we're learning all the time.
What about people who just believe they're here to have a nice time?
Well, that's entirely up to them. It's their belief system. My experience is that's not sustainable. I think most people get to a point where they have to have a level of inner satisfaction, inner purpose as well. I think there are phases in people's lives. I can look back at my own life, and I've been 70 years plus. So, and there was a huge phase in my life which was about me doing things. We've talked about it before, like a human doing.
Mm-hmm.
But now, and has been for the last 20 years, it's like human being. Actually working out, not being preoccupied with what I do in the outer world, but also thinking about where is it taking me and the inner experience that comes with that. And opening up that inner experience. So, if there are certain people that can get through life just trying to have a good time, well, good luck to them. But, life rarely presents people with just a good time. It'll always present you with, challenges, no matter how much money you've got, how much external success. Why is it that, so many very rich people have huge psychological challenges, right? Yeah. Because we still have to deal with ourselves and our inner selves in those moments where there's just us.
An eternal gratification. I mean, that just doesn't exist. And so there will have to be a moment of friction where that resilience is required. And that resilience really is mined from a sense of purpose, which is often what is found when one's sense of self is shattered around,
And it often takes the crises, doesn't it, for us to really find out who we are, because we play the game of success and we present the game of success as far as we can, but we know we'll be found out at some point.
Yeah.
And that's when we have to come back to our inner world. I work with neurodiverse people, people with anxiety disorders. And we'll probably touch on this more in a future forecast, but it's a huge example of how people have been pushed to the limits in terms of their understanding of themselves and the social projections they have to handle, where they're judged, and that's a huge emotional crisis for people who feel isolated and marginalized by others because they don't behave in a typical way. And, whilst it's very poignant, very powerful, it's also very inspirational for those who find a way of fighting back. And unfortunately, not all of them do. I mean, certainly in the groups I'm working with now, there's at least 5 people that have actually attempted suicide, okay? And they've survived, And it's all, but, someone would openly say, and I don't know if I'm going to try again. So to work out where you fit and what your purpose is and who you are is fundamental at those crises point. You can't explain that away in terms of external success because it's the way you feel. An art is the classic example. So many artists, brilliant at their expressions, often because they feel the pain. They understand what the pain is. You think of, painters, etc. in the past, but obviously all the musicians that have met an early end because they've had to cope with life in a different way. And it was their inner struggles that destroyed them in the end. So, what this conversation does, I think, is it shows the links between science, spirituality, and psychology, in a sense.
Absolutely.
We're back into the unconscious and the things that drive us. And my belief, the unconscious is our connection with the quantum world, the quantum realm. It's the water below the surface, the current that drives the iceberg. And we go back, when the iceberg melts, we go back to being part of that, the flow of that ocean.
Oh, I love that idea. Just on art as well, I always think when I'm obsessed with this cultural life, just to big up another podcast. And, when great artists are being interviewed and like probed on the act of creation, so many, and they almost all use almost exactly the same phrasing, but it just sort of came to me. It just sort of arrived. It's like I channeled it. I was kind of a conduit for it. And it, so yes, as the psychology, art, spirituality, science, it all seems to be speaking around the edges of this same instinct that there is
absolutely
some source.
Totally get that. I can relate to that very personally because, I've said to you before, my brain is mine, but my mind is everyone's. It's there to be shared, and that's the whole point of the exercise. It's energy, and energy is shareable, and I believe timeless, But again, that's back to a belief system. But it is, as I've learned, from being in my corporate life, which ended about 20 years ago, which was all about doing, proving external success, and I'm not knocking that. It gave me some great things, right? But it didn't serve me beyond that. The thing I've learned to do is free up my thinking, and in the last episode of this series, we'll talk about quantum thinking and what we mean about that. And essentially, it's really about just freeing ourselves up and recognizing our own limitations and our own biases that take us to the same places in terms of the way we think. And we need new solutions and new perspectives. So part of the connection with what you've said is the more you do that, the more you feel that your mind isn't your own. It's being fed by something else. Then we're into the concept of morphogenetic fields.
I was nodding emphatically until
until I said that.
Morphogenetic fields.
So when we come, and I hope this isn't too heavy, but I don't think it is. I think it's fun. It's enjoyable. So morphogenetic fields are basically the idea that the universe carries packages and structures of information. Remember we talked about the intelligent universe, right?
Yeah.
So it carries those in a way that we don't fully understand, but there's certainly some concepts around that. But in essence, that intelligence is downloaded to us, right? So the human brain, rather than being something that creates intelligence, actually receives intelligence from the universe and allows that to be translated into a human experience. Okay? So the human brain and body becomes the anchor for the human experience, right? Because without that, obviously, the universe has nothing to experience, right? But what our brain and body are only part of that experience. And what we're doing is constantly connecting with the universe, and we become the TV sets that download the pixels into a way that creates meaning from the images we create in our mind.
Yeah.
Yeah? So that's a lot to get your head around. Can you make sense of that? How can you relate to that or not?
Oh yeah, no.
I think I need some feedback now because I'm pushing this a bit.
I didn't know the term morphogenetic field, but I am very familiar with the idea that we are the TV sets and we are receiving via our antennae some, signal of intelligence, and that is the relationship between mind and brain, or the sort of paradox of mind and brain.
Yeah.
And that to me feels like, I don't know, I had an expectation when we were going into our episode on spirituality that we'd linger on God, but actually we're sort of, again, at the nature of energy and consciousness.
Yeah.
And
to me, God is just another model.
Yeah.
And that's not dismissive in any way. I said I believe in my God, my version of a God. Yeah. And it may not be other people's version, because I know my own perceptual systems will influence that. But that doesn't invalidate it. It's not about right or wrong. It's just how we link our experiences to those belief systems. Yeah. And therefore, God being another model is a way of us connecting with, interacting with a power that is bigger than us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's back to the icons, on the laptop. It's my personal icon that gives me meaning because it's something I can interact with and relate to.
The icon of a higher power.
Yes.
Stick that on your desktop.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely that. And it's that imagery, and it just opens up our type of thinking. But, I very much relate to your comments about, I don't know where some of the ideas come from. I don't know how I've acquired the ability to spot patterns across different disciplinary, fields in order to create new patterns of thinking and understanding. And I'm not bigging myself up here. That's my point. I don't think it's me.
Yeah,
there's something else going on that's using the machinery of my brain to create a new level of understanding for me. And that's a great feeling, like serendipity. We talked about that for a moment, okay? Yeah. So I said we can play with this, can't we? So serendipity is perhaps this is the last one we'll deal with for now, but people more and more comment about coincidences and how they can't believe sometimes the coincidences in their lives. So another experience for me in opening my mind up is the whole level of so-called coincidences that come to me is just crazy. It's like a regular event, where things I'm looking for are presented to me. Okay. And that could be the next piece of study that I want to do that didn't exist, but somehow found its way into my inbox when I didn't even know that I was looking for it, right? Type of thing. And I think that's perfect. And that stuff goes on all the time. Now, there's a plausible argument that says that's about energetic connection. Because when we're in an open state and we're ready to receive information, it will find us.
Yeah.
No, there's nothing fatalist in that, right? There's nobody like turning the handle and saying, all right, you can have this next piece of information. To me, it's like this matrix of energy, and it means that you're back to the fundamental laws of either attraction or repulsion. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pull towards or push away. And I think when you're open-minded about this information, it has access to you. Mm-hmm. And in my view, in some way that I can't understand, it finds its way to me. And I have more opportunities for learning and growth than I would have if my mind wasn't open. Make sense?
Yes, it does. I've heard it referred to as synchronicity. Does that?
Yeah. I think that, that sort of principle, and I guess I'm just trying to come up with a updated way of looking at that because, often I'll hear people say, oh, well, that's synchronicity, great, but it's just a label. And I just think I'm trying to get underneath that and sort of saying, but how could that actually work rather than just accept the label? And I think this is this energetic exchange with an intelligent universe.
Yeah. This is reminding me of a feeling that I have and have really had so strongly at the beginning of learning about the quantum field, quantum energy. This feeling that my sense of mystery of anything that felt holy or serendipitous, some like the hand of the universe, anything that was that kind of spiritual inclination that I was concerned was straying into the fluffy, or, with the sort of academic and scientific, but then also really creative space that I inhabit. And this sits sort of in the middle and goes, to all of those different
That's the point.
fields. And it's the coming together of all of those things where it feels like, oh, you can hold hands with all of those instincts. Yes. And not only that, you can be with them in a way that will make them deeper and richer, and you can have a more embodied relationship with that sense of being in union with the universe.
And, that maybe a point to finish on is like, so, and I haven't thought about this beforehand, but that presents an image in my mind, the around the table type image where you've got the spiritualist, the scientist, the psychologist, the neuroscientist, the physicist, and they're all discussing the same areas because they have respect for each other's opinions, and they're looking for what they can share rather than what divides them, and it's part of that acknowledgement of ultimately we're all connected. We're in it as a species of the universe that's constantly evolving intelligently.
Right.
I'm not going to follow that.
No, Drop the mic, Clive.
Yeah, I can't. Pass me a mic.
Amazing. Thank you. I loved that. Great. Well, thanks for joining, and I hope you enjoyed that as much as we do. And join us for more on Timeless.